Welcome to Stating the Obvious, where we dive into the truths about entrepreneurship that should be obvious but often aren't. I'm Geraud Staton, an entrepreneur trainer and life coach, here to guide you through the real stories of creativity, leadership, and the ups and downs of building a business. Each episode, we'll talk to inspiring guests who share their journeys and hard-earned lessons. This week's guest is Carl Nordgren, a good friend of mine. Carl has worked as a fishing guide in northwestern Ontario, been a bartender, a foundryman, and an entrepreneur. For 14 years, he taught courses in creativity and entrepreneurship at Duke University and has written a number of books that we'll link in the show notes. So let's get ready to learn from my friend, Carl Nordgren. Awesome. Let's hop into it.
Okay.
Carl, I am so excited for you to be doing this.
I too. I was pleased when you asked me to, and I'm excited to do it.
Yeah, we have so many amazing conversations, and we'll rehash some things we've talked about, but like always, we're probably going to venture into some new territory. So I think, like most interviews, start learning a little bit about you.
Okay. Well, I always like to start with the what's the story of the superheroes, their origin story.
Yeah.
My origin story has to be the fact that at the age of 15, I was a fishing guide in Northwest Ontario. I made it from Northern Illinois at the last day of school, my sophomore year. My dad was waiting for me out in the parking lot. I jumped in the family station wagon. I had saved enough money to fly from Midway Airport up to Minneapolis. At Minneapolis, I then took purposely a local bus that would stop at all the towns so that I could sleep on the bus and wouldn't have to pay for a hotel night.
Oh, genius. I like that.
And then I got to the border from International Falls, our side, Fort Francis on the Canadian side. And I had been told by the fishing camp owner that I would need to lie as I crossed, that I could not tell them that I was there to get a job as a fishing guide. They would not let me in, but rather that I was just there to go up and fish. And so
Oh,
this is 1966. So the technology isn't there to really catch you up on much, right?
right.
So then I'd hitchhiked the last 2 hours or so up to Kenora, which is where all the bush planes were, and then another hour and a half flight on a bush plane into the camp. And I went there, Gerard, to learn how to be a fishing guide. What I had no idea was that because of the gentleman who owned this camp, Barney Lamb, I learned so much entrepreneurial wisdoms from this guy, so many entrepreneurial wisdoms. So I was there for a bunch of years. While I was there, almost every other week, some successful executive with a beer in his hand would stand up and look at me and say, Nordgren, you lucky son of a gun, don't you ever go into an office. Don't join the corporate world. And I heard that so many times, I
Yeah.
started to believe it. So coming out of college, and I easily confess I was a lousy college student, but coming out of college, I spent most of the 70s staying out of the office, right? I was a bartender, I was a factory worker, I was a foundryman catching molten steel. And then finally, I said, all right, let's see what it's like to get a job. And nobody would even look at me, let alone hire me, because I had no resume at all. I was a lousy college student. The only company that would hire me was a startup textbook publishing company in Chicago. And I went to work for them. I was the first marketing guy. And the first time I came up with an idea pitched to the founder, that the founder said, hey, this is great. You need to hire somebody to take on this for you. I thought, oh, an idea that I can come up with could result in somebody getting a job.
Uh-huh.
I was hooked. I was hooked on entrepreneurship right then and there. So I spent about 40 years plus or minus in various entrepreneurial gigs. And then the next big change was when Duke asked me to come teach a class on entrepreneurship. 2002 is when this was. And that's when my calling began. That's why
Yeah.
I'm here. When that request was made of me, I first said no, because as I said, I was a lousy college student and I was afraid they were going to ask for my transcript and they would change their mind once they saw it. And I didn't want that embarrassment. But they let me in. And they gave me a curriculum to teach this class of entrepreneurship to 24 seniors. So I barely in the classroom as a student,
Yeah.
never in a classroom teaching, So I thought, okay, let me see. Oh, here's the obvious thing. Class in entrepreneurship. And within the first minute or two, I said, raise your hand if you want to introduce yourself to us through the business that you've started. And nobody raised their hand. I said, okay, you're seniors at Duke. You've been busy. I learned later they've been way, way too busy all their lives.
Yeah.
They're
Yeah.
busy. And who wants to talk about a company they're going to start in the next 5 years? And nobody raised their hand.
No one?
So a class of 24 kids, you're here in a class on entrepreneurship, and you don't want to start businesses. And it took us only about 10 minutes of that first class to figure out that the reason they were taking this class was the hope that they would become more entrepreneurial in their thinking.
Ah,
Smart insight for them to have. Right? I want to
absolutely.
be more entrepreneurial. And I thought, okay, I would much rather teach a class designed to help you be creative and entrepreneurial than how to raise capital and what the legal structures are for startups. I don't want to teach that.
Where do you think that came from? I mean, so I know that entrepreneurial thinking is big. It's big in leadership. We even talk about entrepreneurs in organizations, but usually that seems to come from someone above. It is rare, at least that I've seen, that someone says, "Oh, I don't want to start a business, but entrepreneurial skills are important." So how did this group of kids get that?
I'm sure there was I'm sure they were half clear in their ideas and that I met them halfway and sort of helped them develop it. But what they loved was the invitation that said, okay, if that's what you want, and I've got a whole curriculum for something else, but if that's what you want, let's create that class
Yeah.
and let's create it together and let's create it now. And so that was the beginning of me committing my life. It's a calling now, Gerard, the committing my life to helping each of us and all of us be our most creative and our most entrepreneurial selves. I call myself a creative populist for that reason, each of us and all of
I
us.
love that term. We'll talk about that in a little
Uh,
bit. That's a great term.
so that's so I taught there for a bunch of years. Now I'm mostly doing workshops and other teaching and coaching on the same topic, always on the same topic. I've written some novels that sort of come out of my fishing guide
Yep.
experiences. And I have a radio show now that I'm going to get you on the show
Looking
as
forward to
soon
it.
as I can on WCHL in Chapel Hill called Exploring Your Creative Genius.
We'll make sure we tag that at the end as well. Very important.
And the announcer says Nordgren will take an expansive view on what it means to be creative.
Ooh.
When I was at Duke, I was only in my second semester or so when a couple of professors, and they were trying to catch me out. I could tell they came up to me and said, Nordgren, define creativity for us. And I have to confess, I couldn't. And I felt kind of caught out, right? I thought I would have been.
I feel caught out. You didn't even ask me. I feel like that.
Yeah. So I knew then that, I mean, back then I couldn't define it. Now I know I shouldn't define it. Now I know that as soon as I define creativity, somebody's going to say, "Oh, well, then that's what it is."
Ah,
But it is so much more.
yeah.
It's so much more. I've developed 76 different aspects of creative and entrepreneurial behaviors, and so when everything in the world around us is changing, how can a fixed definition of something like creativity serve us? And so,
That's very fair.
yeah, yeah. So that's I now know that I won't define it, and I help people. Now I love Charlie Mingus. He says, "You want me to improvise? Give me something to improvise off of." So I'll give people a whole lot of prompt
Yes.
and a whole lot of different aspects so that they can create their own understanding of what it means to be creative.
Yeah, I think there's two sides of that, and I love it because that's the side that I usually sit on. Usually when we're in, and it can be a misunderstanding, as particularly as a leader of an organization. So I have found that I will say, okay, everyone, let's come together, figure out what it is we're going to do, whatever that may be, whatever our goal is. And I'll start, let me give you a base, and then my expectation is that once that's in place, everyone will shift things around, add things, take things out. I just feel like it's easier to start with something. But unfortunately, what happens sometimes is people go, oh,
Yep,
he's come up with it. And
yep,
then nothing else happens. I'm like, no, no. This thing I came up with was literally like 2 minutes of thought. This cannot be the answer.
right.
I just wanted us to
Have something to respond
have
to.
something to respond to.
Yeah, and
That's
that's
right.
so important to the creative process, right? Yeah, a blank sheet of paper can be daunting for a lot of people, right? For a lot of
Yes.
people, but give me a couple of words on there, and now we're getting going. So yeah,
Yeah, as an oil painter, I always made fun of folks who did this, but when I started doing it, it was great. And that was, I also get blank canvas issue. I get frozen up. What's the next painting going to be? I have 1,000 ideas. Which one do I pick? And then I've heard of artists who just put a squiggle, dip their brush in some paint and just swoop it across. And then they start from there.
Right.
And the first time I did it, I was like, this is stupid. Oh, but I do like that blue. And I immediately I'm able to hone in on it. And yeah, I think that's great. So let's start with is awesome.
Yeah. Well, Cezanne is known in his letters, it's captured what his painting process was, and that is, I mean, Picasso on the other, well, on one hand, wouldn't start until he knew what it was going to look like when it was
Yes.
finished.
Yeah.
And when you see some of his canvases, of course.
I don't know Cezanne
But
still.
Cezanne says, let's just get started. And the painting is going to teach me what it is I should be
Um,
doing. And that's similar to how I feel about a novel that I'm writing, right? I have some idea,
yep.
but mostly it's just going to be an exploration with these characters of what we're going to be doing together. I
Yeah.
love open-endedness. I just really love open-endedness.
Oh, yes,
You
absolutely.
get your best from folks when you let them fill it in.
Every painting that I've ever done that I think is a success is exactly that. I always think a painting is a failure if you look at it and say, "Is that Aphrodite?" Yeah, and then then I'm ready to chuck it out. I want everyone to come up with a different story. And I don't tell the story anymore. So I will tell you, I had a painting. I loved it. It was a woman with her back to the viewer, holding a doll that was torn with an eye
Oh
out, and
my,
the background was
that sounds
kids playing.
compelling. Yeah, yeah.
So neat. And a guy came in and he looked at it. I was at a show and he looked at it and he left. And then he brought his wife and they looked at it together. Oh no, he brought friends. He brought two friends and they looked at it. And I was not a great salesman at the time, but I mean, he was big. So I didn't come bother him. I said, if you have any questions, let me know. He's like, great. And they looked at it. He was talking and then he left. And I was like, oh no. And then he brought his wife in and I was like, I got this sale, and he's looking at it and she is but he's so in love
But
with it
she's
and it's
not,
great.
no, yeah.
And then she turns to me and she says, tell me about this painting. Now I don't know what story he has in his head, but I ruin it by saying, ah, this is Medea. I'm so proud. Medea loved someone so much that she killed her kids for love. And I don't usually do tragic things, but I just thought, and put this in a modern setting, and you've got this person filled with regret looking at the things from her kids. And the husband's face immediately darkens, and he says, oh, this painting reminds me of my two kids who are off in college, and when they come home, I feel like, oh, they feel like they're so out of place, and there was a little sadness to it. I mean, they had kids, and then they walk out. I was like, no.
Oh,
And I had been so proud of my little
yeah.
story, but he had a wholly
He had his
a
own
story.
story. Yes, exactly.
So I don't horn in on, and now I never. People are like, what does this painting mean?
Right.
What's it mean to you? If you say the same thing it means to me, I'm probably never going to show it again.
Yeah. Right.
So yeah,
Very cool.
I love
That's a
it.
great story. That's
Thank
a
you.
great story. Yeah, folks invest themselves in their stories.
Yeah.
And our brains so much love to have a story that it's so hard to dislodge that story once which is can be all for the good, right? When it's
Yep.
the story you want people to be embracing.
Oh, and people are already so creative. Even people, that guy might have said, "Oh boy, I'm not very creative at all. That's why I like art." But he created this story, and everyone's
Nice.
got it from their
Very
own.
nice. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I like that. I like that.
So one of the things I want to talk about creative populism, and maybe we'll talk about that if you could define that, because the other question I was going to ask is, how do you feel without defining creativity? Why is it so important? But I think you'll answer the question, a lot of it, when you tell us what creative populism actually is.
Thank you very much. I love talking about it. As I think I mentioned earlier, I do have a calling, and that calling got another boost of energy when I realized that the work that I have been doing, helping people grow their creative capacities, I call upon a piece of research that NASA was involved in when they wanted to hire creative scientists and engineers, and they had a creativity assessment tool created for them. They used it. They listed or they identified their top 5% performers as their creative geniuses. The gentleman who developed that assessment, when he saw how pleased NASA was with its accuracy,
Yeah.
he took the same tool, recruited 1,600, so statistically reliable, 1,600 5-year-old, I believe they were Project Head Start school children,
Mhm.
and gave them the assessment. And 98% of them scored at NASA's creative genius level. 98%. That's all of us. And when we so badly in our nation, for political and social reasons right now, need some common ground, it took me a while to realize that this common ground that I've been sharing in my workshops, and when I tell people about this research and that we're all born creative geniuses, the room changes, man.
Yeah.
People love to be known as this, and they love to know that they're in a room full of people who are like this, right? We all like to be seen at our best.
Yeah.
So we just are looking at each other and saying, "Oh, isn't this wonderful?" And you can tell when somebody's going to say, "Yeah, I'll remember now what I was doing when I was 6 years old," and they just so I know now from having 10,000 experiences sharing that story
Yep.
that it is as attractive to the left as it is to the right. And it is as useful to people in urban settings as it is to people in rural settings.
Real common ground.
Real common ground. And there's got to, I'm not going to insist that I know exactly what to do with this. I have a couple of things more, and this is where the creative populism can be sort of further illuminated, and that is on that piece of common ground, we discover the most rational and the most optimistic stories about our future of unknowable unknowns. That's another piece of common ground that we've got. We're all living into this future where change will be constant and unexpected. There'll be more fierce disruptions like the one that we went through with COVID, but the
Yeah.
next one won't be anything like that disruption.
Right.
Yeah, and there's also going to be extraordinary opportunities, right? Big technology breakthroughs that are unimaginable right now. They're going to create new social opportunities that are going to be marvelous for us all. So, isn't it rational that in preparation for this future of unknowable unknowns, isn't it rational we would develop our creative and our entrepreneurial qualities because those are exactly what you need when you're entering a world of challenge where you don't know what the challenge is going to be. So it's rational and it's optimistic as it plays to our strengths.
Yeah.
This is who we are. So, and we need an optimistic story. We
We
need one
really do.
very badly.
Yes.
75% of high school kids report that they're scared to death of the future. Uh, yeah,
Oh,
75. I was afraid of the atomic bomb in 1960,
yeah.
but I couldn't wait for the future. The
Yes.
future was going to be glorious and extraordinary and full of adventure.
We were worried about nuclear weapons in the 80s, but again, same thing.
Yeah.
Like, oh, can't wait to be an adult. Can't wait to go out and do the things that I want to do and conquer the world.
And
And
these kids are afraid of the future.
oh,
So what do we say to them? I've been, I think we should say to them, develop your creative and your entrepreneurial qualities because that's the best preparation you can invest yourself in for this future. I've been playing around with some futurists lately. What have I been playing around? I've been getting to know them and we've been sharing some stuff back and forth. And I love their humility, Gerard, these professional futurists. When they send a 5-year or a 10-year projection to a municipality or to a big business, they will say to them, our most likely scenario isn't very likely.
yeah,
So how do we prepare for
I
that?
love that. I love that.
Isn't that great?
Do you find that a lot of people, oh, well, I mean, this is slightly, I try not to do leading questions, but this one sort of is because this is what I see so often. Many of my, fortunate enough to have friends from multiple generations, older, younger, and I do find that a lot of my younger friends, that idea that the future is so open does not give them any comfort. It is terrifying to them. And a lot of them, I find that they have trouble picking a path or deciding on a thing they want to try as if once I put my foot down, this thing's forever. It
Right,
must be forever.
right.
How do you answer that? Or,
Yeah.
or have you found an answer to that?
Well, my answer is I'm sort of a Johnny One Note is what my father would have said, which is I keep repeating the same answer. I just help them. I do my best to help them embrace the fact that it's going to help you right now. First of all, yes, it's going to help you in the future to be creative and entrepreneurial, but every business organization identifies creativity as the number one skill set in business these days,
Yeah,
right? So it's important for you right now to invest yourself in that, right? To get the job you're looking for right now. And it's fun. It's
it's
so much
absolute fun
fun to be engaged in creative activities.
to not know how a thing is going to end, but to have the optimism that it will end well.
Yes,
It's one of the greatest things. I'm,
yes,
well, I don't know if the listeners know this quite yet or not, but I'm also a role player. I do a lot, Dungeons and Dragons and GURPS and things like that. And I have trouble with, we sandbox, which means that I make everything up as I go. Usually, I might plan a little bit how the session's going to start, but then I don't know. There's something so amazing knowing that we are all crafting a story together, and I don't know where it's going to go, but I bet it's going to be fun. And
yes,
that very idea
yeah,
makes it fun for everybody. It
yeah.
seems like for everybody, but the idea that I'm saying, oh, we're going to play, and at the end of 3 hours, we are going to be at this place. That seems like a terrible story. Like I am not interested in reading the end of the book first.
Right, right.
So yeah, I absolutely
Yeah,
love that openness.
and my mom did exactly that. My mom used to read the last pages of the
Really?
book first.
I've heard of this, but I've
Yes.
never known how to do it.
She didn't do it each and every time, but she did it frequently enough that she became known for it.
Do you know why?
My father insisted he knew why,
Yeah.
which was she's not going to waste her time reading the whole book if she doesn't like the way it ends.
Oh, okay.
That
I
works
guess
for me.
that's fair. That's
That
fair.
works for me. That works for me. That's as good of an explanation as I could imagine.
Probably the best one because in my head I was like, oh no, is she just too nervous about it? I don't know where it's going.
She wanted to know how it ended.
Oh wow. Okay.
She read it. And I don't know how you know how a story ends in the last two or three pages. You don't know what story is ending in the
Right.
last two or three pages, but she was known for
She
it.
wants to make sure the dog doesn't die or whatever.
I don't want to read the line. And then the alarm went off and they realized it's all.
That's a good.
Fourth grade.
Oh boy.
Fourth grade.
Everyone.
Had a story where she like that.
So many
And the
things. Curse at
experience.
Owl Creek was my one of my favorite short stories ever. And then anytime it ever happened, I was like, yeah, yeah, the Curse at Owl Creek did that. We don't worry about it. We got it. Oh, that's awesome. So creativity. We've sort of talked a little bit about it, but yeah, more. Like I know that one of the things that and I love futurism. I know you and I talk about my idol Darren Brown a little bit. Speaking of which, did you get to see it?
I have now got him on my reading list. I checked out his site. I haven't really dug in
Yeah,
yet.
yeah, yeah.
Thank you for the introduction of it. It looks very, very, very interesting.
That whole sort of neurolinguistic programming, all the stuff work that he does. But yeah, the mindset of how people actually move forward. And so talking about the future, which scares a lot of people, excites fewer and fewer people. I'm one of those people that I say to a lot of my friends, like, yeah, I think the world will get better. And not only do they disagree, but they think I'm insane for
Yes.
thinking this. Like, how could you? And then they point to a few things that are terrible. And look, it's not perfect. I'm not even pretending that it is, but I think it is better because as a black male, if you said, "Hey, got a time machine, you can go back to any point in time that you want to. Where do you go?" And I can't think of any place that I would go where I would feel safer, like
Yes.
I could do better, that I
Good.
could grow
I'm
more. And
sorry about
so,
that, but yes, I hear you loud and clear.
yeah, right. And so for me, I feel like, yeah, because of that, it must mean that the world is getting better, or, at least that, or we've hit a peak, but that seems crazy.
That seems crazy.
So,
I have optimism for sure about the future. Part of it is disciplined optimism, in that I do have three grandchildren
mhm.
who live joyful lives. A 12-year-old, 10-year-old, and a 7-year-old. They just live joyful lives. Much of that joy comes from within them, much of that joy is offered to them.
Yeah.
And so I'm dedicating all the work that I do, this podcast, to see what I can do to make it more likely that 20 years from now they can still be living a joyful life. That 20 years after that they could, I mean, these kids could live till the end of the century.
Carl, that is crazy.
Isn't that crazy?
Wow. Yeah. Yeah.
I know people who could live to the end of the century,
Oh,
and I just want to do all I possibly can to make sure that there's still an opportunity for joy in the world when we enter that unknowable future.
man. Wow, Carl, that's beautiful. That, yeah, I love that. As a person that doesn't have any kids, people that like, why care about the future, right? There are a lot of people that don't have kids or want kids, but I do have godkids, and I really care about what the world is for them. But I've also always said, we should care about schools because just because you don't have kids, these are going to be people that are going to be running the world,
Yeah,
hopefully curing cancer, helping us move forward in all sorts of things. And we
exactly.
we need to
Repairing
help
your
them.
car,
Yes.
all the
All
stuff,
the whatever
all
it
of it.
is.
Yeah, yeah. We need everybody. And the notion that you have to have kids to be invested in the future, I know that there's certain political argument that is suggesting that that is just so crazy.
No.
That is so
Just because you don't have kids
crazy.
doesn't mean you don't care about the world or your fellow man or what is coming.
I've just really been baffled by that insistence that you're not thinking properly about the future if you don't have children. That just doesn't make any sense to me at all.
Yeah.
Not at all. I'm sure that ex-wife decided she didn't want to have children. I'm sure she's really very conscious about helping this world be a better world. There's no doubt in my mind.
Right.
There's no doubt in my mind.
Yeah.
So yeah, children are cool. I love it. I love watching a 4-year-old child and think, holy cow, that's the most extraordinary creative activity I've ever seen. Oh no, that's the most. Oh, wait a minute. They all are. Every single one of them are
Yes.
engaged in wonderful creative activity. So that's such a delight, right? I mean, that's just such a delight. And we all make our own decisions about how we're going to move forward.
Yeah, that's exactly. Well, speaking of that, we talk a little about obviously it's a podcast about entrepreneurialism. And as we talk about creativity and entrepreneurialism, but also this idea that the most likely scenario to happen is not very likely. How do we prepare? So creativity matters.
Yes.
How does this apply? Like, right, if I said, wow, I don't feel very creative, what can our listener do
Okay.
to build on that creativity and maybe even entrepreneurialism if they think that they don't have that naturally?
Thank you. And I love this dynamic. What can they do? Since we are all born creative geniuses,
Yep.
all it takes, it's not easy, but it's simple, right? I often conflate the two. Let's separate the two. It's not easy, but it is simple. All it takes is for you to declare that from this point forward, you are going to intentionally be your most creative and entrepreneurial self. People are intentional about stuff all the time.
All the
I
time.
talked to some graduate students at UNC last night when I was urging them to be intentional. I said, there's no doubt in my mind that you all are very effective at being intentional, or you wouldn't be getting your PhD at a quality university like UNC. And so just be intentional. And here's what I've got a two-step intentional routine for people. First, declare to yourself, to the person across the table from you, to your spouse, to whoever that significant person in your life, declare to yourself, declare to them that from this point forward, and you win immediately, Gerard, because I like to call them the 4P professions: physicists and philosophers,
Yep.
poets and psychiatrists. They all agree that from their very different professional perspectives, they all agree on this, that we don't see the world the way it is, we see the world the way we are. And so when you embrace that you are a creative and an entrepreneurial person, you begin to see the world as a creative and entrepreneurial person.
Yeah.
Not big transformations, I'm not suggesting that. Probably it's an incremental change in your perception. But if you have been looking at a problem for a while and now you get to look at it just a little bit differently, that might be what opens up the understanding of how to resolve this problem, right? So that's the first thing we do. We declare that we are. We get somebody to sort of hold us to that. One of the great blessings in my life is that the world sees me as a creative person. So they're holding me in that position, right?
Yes.
I now have to be because that's how the world is treating me.
Yes.
Well, here's the next place I urge people to go with their intentionality is to be intentional in the language that we use.
Oh, yeah.
Before COVID, we spoke 16,000 words a day. I don't know how COVID might have affected that, but let's go with that number. What a tremendous field of opportunity to bring incrementally, once again, just a little bit more, right? Instead of saying should, maybe you put yourself and say could, right? And
Uh-huh.
and and maybe you ask open-ended questions. Not did you enjoy the movie last night, but what about the movie did you really enjoy
Yes.
last night? And then if I'm in a workshop, I'll say, raise your hand if you like being taken advantage of. And in the presence of 15,000 people, probably I think one person once raised their hand and then apologized later that he was being a wise guy. But if we don't like being taken advantage of, let's think about this. When an opportunity comes along, almost all of us will say, I wonder how I can take advantage of that opportunity. Now,
Yeah.
it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to take the best for you and leave the rest for other people,
Right.
but by saying it, you've at least incrementally made it more likely.
Yeah.
If instead we say, I wonder how I can create advantage from this opportunity. Once again, it doesn't necessarily mean I'm going to nurture it and cultivate it and care for it and invite good people into work. But having spoken it, at least incrementally, I'm more likely to move in that direction,
Yeah.
right? Our thoughts shape our words. Let's be more mindful about how our words shape our subsequent thinking.
And they do. This is proven in so many the four P's. I love that. But this is a thing that is absolutely known by most people, right?
Right.
At least most professionals or philosophers, if you don't count them as professionals for some reason. But it's absolutely known that the way we speak, not only to the world, to people around us, to the universe itself, but to ourselves,
Yeah.
influences very heavily. And so we can make fun of things like, mantras and speaking in the mirror. But you do that long enough and you start to believe, just like in the same way, if you talk total shit about yourself, even if you didn't really believe it, you start, what is it, the broken windows theory?
Oh, yeah, yeah. Go ahead.
Where if you could be the neatest person and care about your environment, but if you live in a neighborhood where glass gets broken or a window gets broken and no one fixes it, that's when the neighborhood starts to deteriorate. And they started seeing this. They did it, and I think Malcolm Gladwell talks about
Okay.
it. So you could find it if you want to look this up. Look him up, and
Yes,
you'll hear the
yes.
story better. But I believe New York City did some big experiment where anytime anyone tagged one of the subway cars, they immediately cleaned, no waiting, and it was frustrating for a long time. But eventually, it got better. They got tagged less. Things
Nice.
started building up a little bit.
Yeah.
But we start seeing that when people start feeling a little bit of hopelessness,
Right.
that hopelessness builds. It's this weird little cyclone that if you don't get out of it, it just starts bringing everything down around. But it works the exact other way too. And I think that's important for people to see.
Well, body in motion tends to stay in motion, so let's be sure that we know which direction that motion is, right?
Yeah.
So the other thing I'd tell people about to impact their creative language use is that really begins all of that is for you to be ready to give your companion, your friend, the colleague across the table, the greatest gift I think we can give each other these days, which is your undivided attention,
Oh, yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And if I'm in a workshop and I say that, I pretend like I'm picking up my phone and because I'm checking the email. I'll be right back. Your undivided attention, and you know when you've got somebody's undivided attention. You feel so seen and regarded when you've got
Yeah.
somebody's undivided attention. Yeah, and the person that's providing that attention, if they not only are listening with full attention, but also bring the attitude of being generous with their listening, being appreciative, listening for the best of what your friend is saying to you.
Oh,
Listen for the very best of it. Isn't it most likely that then when you talk to them, you're going to be talking from that place of appreciating the best of the idea, the best of the story, the best of whatever it is that they have shared with you?
I love that.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, giving the benefit of the doubt, most of us are good listeners, particularly if it's people that we care about or interested in. We could all use a little bit of help in that, but listening for the best
Yes.
specifically,
Yeah.
That's a good step up.
Yeah.
That's really good.
Each one of my three daughters, at some point in their, probably in their high school ages, they eventually came up to me and said some version of the following: Dad, one of the things we liked about you is that we know when we have your attention, and we know that because you tell us when we can't have your attention. Don't tell me this right now. I can't really focus on you right
Yeah.
now. And they appreciate that. They really like to know that when I didn't do that, that meant they had my undivided attention.
In the peer support work that we do with soldiers, we talk about that very thing. Look, you're listening to one another. Maybe you can't go to a psychologist. Maybe you don't believe in therapy, but you've got to be able to talk to your battle buddy. But one of the things that you should not do is what we call making false promises. So if you don't have the time right now, reframe it and say, this seems really important to you, and I want to talk to you about it, but I have to go to work in 5 minutes. So let's talk about it later. And it is your job to follow up on that.
Yep.
Or if you're in a weird sorry, I just had an argument myself. Let's come back to this. And in the same way, if someone's having an issue and you're like, oh, I know you need help moving, call me anytime and I'll be ready to talk. But also, if at 10 o'clock you turn your phone to do not disturb,
Mhm.
right? Then you've made
Mhm.
a false promise that if someone does call you on
Right.
that, then
Right.
at 10:15 they can't get a hold of you, and now you've become unreliable and maybe part of the problem. And
Yes.
so
I
we
heard that.
love that being able to say like that honesty of saying not now, but I do in fact care. And so when I am listening, I am all yours.
Well, I'm fascinated by the work that you do with our military
Thank you.
personnel.
Thank you.
You told me a little bit about that last time we were together, and I'm happy to know of somebody who's doing what you're doing.
Thank you. I appreciate it. It means a lot having been in the Air Force myself and knowing how difficult it can be to find someone to talk to. And, we know that it's not true because the command hired us. But even then, the soldiers don't know. The soldiers often say that they feel like their superiors don't care about them at all. And again, we know that's not true, but perception matters.
Perception matters. Oh, yep. Perception is reality is what I remember reading once upon a time.
Absolutely, right? What someone said, the purpose of what you say is not what you meant, but what was heard. And I think that is so, oh, just if you can remember that, because I've been able to sit in rooms where there is an argument happening, whether it's a heated argument or just people sort of riffing with one another. But sometimes the argument just, I hear they're both saying the same thing. And I'm like, oh, you're hearing a different thing, and then this person is arguing that that's not what I mean, and then they're sort of repeating themselves. And like, nope, as far as anyone knows, you've said the same thing to them. Like nothing is changing because you're showing from the same exact point of view, and so this headbutting just happens. So that's what's happening with command. A lot of the time when we go to this base, they just, hey, we're implementing this thing, and the soldiers are like, oh, they're on us again.
Right.
And that's not the intent. I see that's not the intent, but command isn't taking the time to listen. And they're not listening for the best. They're just putting a thing out there that they think will solve it and not telling anything else. And so that's hard.
And I was that way the first 10 years or so of my business career, right?
Yeah.
If I came up with a great idea, I expected you to like it. I
Yes.
expected everybody was going to like it, and you should like it. And if you don't like it, what's wrong with you? And then I heard somebody talk about how arrogant I was behind my back.
Ah,
And I thought, oh, okay.
yeah. I mean,
Not that.
yeah.
So I can't say that I immediately shifted, but I began to shift when to this, again, this inviting open-endedness, right? If I got an idea, I want to bring it to somebody when it's still so early enough in the idea's life that somebody's really good thoughts about it and improve it.
Yeah.
Especially if that person is later going to be some sort of gatekeeper for me, right? Somebody who's going to have to
Yep.
improve the idea to keep it moving forward. Well, let's get buy-in right away, right?
Yeah.
Right away.
I think the new that I hear a lot that comes from the same place is I just want to be heard. And when often when I hear people say that and I know the backstory, what they're really saying is I want them to do the thing that I recommended because it's never, oh, I was heard and they disagreed.
So I'm fine.
that doesn't work usually.
Yeah.
And so I want to be heard as sort of code for I gave you a suggestion and you didn't do it. Oh, Carl, we are out of time. But
Okay.
just like always, I looked at the clock. Holy moly, time flew.
Yay.
It always does when we have these conversations.
Love it.
It's amazing.
I love it. I love it. I love it.
So, yeah.
I so much enjoy being with you. What do we got here?
Thank you for tuning in to Stating the Obvious. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, or share it with a friend who might find it helpful. You can follow us on Instagram at Stating the Obvious for updates and bonus content, or you can go to my website at lumiere-strategies.com. Until next time, keep learning, keep growing, and keep pushing forward.